sometimes you need a breakthrough right now. If you're wondering how to create a breakthrough nearly instantly, almost like overnight, by employing these things, you're gonna love this episode because that is exactly what we are talking about. Hey, Courtney Sanders here. Welcome back to my podcast. And in today's episode, I want to talk about how to create a breakthrough fast, like super fast. I know oftentimes we learn a lot of tips and strategies on how to create a change over time. And while these strategies are going to help you create a change over time, I know sometimes you need a breakthrough right now. And so if you're wondering how to create a breakthrough nearly instantly, almost like overnight, by employing these things, you're gonna love this episode because that is exactly what we are talking about. All right, so I got the idea to do this episode really after just thinking about my own trajectory and some new milestones that I hit. So recently on my Instagram, and hopefully you are following me on my Instagram. If you're not following me, what are you doing? CourtneyLSanders on Instagram. Because we are now in April, I posted some milestones that I hit in Q1 of 2023 as I am recording this, and just talked about all the different projects and different things that I am working on for Q2. And so as I was thinking about those milestones, I was like, wow, these are some great milestones, but they've been a long time in the making, and they would not have been possible had I not created a lot of the breakthroughs, particularly the mental breakthroughs that I needed to get through in order to get to this place. And so that kind of really inspired today's episode. So some of the breakthroughs and milestones that I was able to achieve in the first quarter of 2023 were hosting my retreat, which I've been talking a lot about, but I'm just like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe I pulled that off. We had like less than 4 months to plan that, and I was able to take, essentially 14 people halfway across the world to South Africa and host my first retreat. I'm super excited to be doing that again next year in 2024. If you're interested in that, you can click the link in the show notes or in the description in order to sign up for the wait list and the information list. So when we have more information coming out, but be forewarned, I have a lot of content. I haven't even posted half the content from South Africa. I'm super geeked to be releasing those videos, those reels, those photos. So if you think you've seen something, you ain't seen nothing yet. But if that's of interest to you, you can go ahead and get on that list. But yeah, I had this retreat in South Africa. I met my team. A lot of my team is based there, and really even began the beginnings of some really cool business deals that are getting ready to start in South Africa. I got my MBA. So particularly if you are watching this podcast on my YouTube channel, you know that for the last few years, I've been a sponsored student at Capella University. I've been one of their brand ambassadors. And so as a product of that brand ambassadorship, I was able to get my MBA. No, they didn't give it to me. I did have to work and be a normal student, turn in all my assignments and do the things in order to get that MBA. So that was basically 3 years in the making. And so it felt great to walk across the stage in Charlotte, North Carolina. Also in February, actually, right after I got back from my trip in South Africa. So that was crazy. And then I've hit some milestones even in my business in that the first quarter of this year, we've consistently hit at least 6 figures per month, which was a really important milestone that I wanted to hit for a lot of the additional things that I want to invest in my business, and just stuff I want to grow into. We're rebuilding the whole back end of my website. I'm looking to write and publish a book. I'm getting a coaching certification. I'm getting my coaching program certified. So there's a lot of money that I am investing back into my business. And so I wanted to hit those milestones. And I was just like, man, I remember dreaming about this even in like 2020, it's 2023. It's been 3 years, even though it doesn't feel like it's been 3 years because of the pandemic, but still that's a short amount of time, right? But just thinking about how I got there, I realized that the breakthrough really happened overnight, and it was a choice. And it was because of that breakthrough that then allowed me to accomplish many of these things. So if you're curious about how to create a breakthrough overnight, you're in luck, because we're going to get into it right now. All right, the easiest way to create a breakthrough, and you might even like roll your eyes when I say this, but if you haven't experienced a breakthrough and you haven't experienced a breakthrough overnight, it's probably because you're not doing that. And that is to do the opposite of what you've currently been doing. Yes. in order to get a different result, or if we want to change the results that we're getting, oftentimes we have to change the way that we're thinking, right? Because the way that we're thinking produces the process that we keep going under, and then that produces our results. And I think about this even in 2021, right? When I went to a mastermind. So I enrolled in a mastermind. It was $55,000 to be a part of this mastermind. I know that sounds like astronomical to many of you, but it was a great deal for me. Not that it wasn't expensive, because it definitely was expensive at the time, and my business wasn't doing what it's doing now. It wasn't even doing half of what it's doing now. I think in 2021, my revenue was like $650,000 for the year, which was in part because of many of the things that I learned in this mastermind. So I joined this mastermind, I want to say in April of 2021, and was able to put those things in place. But it was great. I learned so much. Many of the strategies that I learned in that mastermind helped me have my first 7-figure year, which was last year in 2022, which was really amazing. But the main reason why I wanted to be in the mastermind was not just to learn cool strategies to grow my business, but really it was to be around entrepreneurs who were way ahead of where I am. So that's one thing about me. If you don't know anything about me, one thing about me is I am going to get around people who are more successful than I am, who are smarter than I am, who are doing amazing things, because I want to soak up their energy and I want to learn from them. And I often find that people who are already past a problem or a roadblock that I'm coming up against, part of the reason why they're past it is because they think differently around a particular mindset that contributes to that particular outcome that I haven't yet overcome. And so that was definitely the case in this mastermind. And in fact, I remember one of the simpler breakthroughs, but it was a really big breakthrough, was this idea of getting support. So I talk a lot about the support that I have. Now I have a housekeeper, I have a meal prep chef, and I have a nanny, but also getting support in my business. So I have executive assistants, an online business manager, a project manager, an instructional design team, sales team. I have a lot of people who are supporting your girl and helping me out in growing this business, but I basically had no one when I was at this retreat. I definitely didn't have my executive assistant. I think I had a virtual assistant, maybe a graphic designer. I was onboarding an online business manager. So, it was a very lean team, and I was still doing a lot of things myself. And so I remember going physically to this mastermind. It was held in Tampa, Florida. And so I flew down there with my daughter and my nanny, and I was just soaking it all in and taking in all the strategies. But I remember starting to feel overwhelmed when they were talking about all the different changes that we needed to make in our business and all the different things that we needed to implement. And so I literally raised my hand to ask, how are you all getting these things done? And mind you, I was in a room with not just 7-figure entrepreneurs, but 8-figure entrepreneurs. I was the least successful person in the room, which was why I joined the mastermind. That's exactly what I wanted. And so everyone who was there was doing multi 7 figures, many even 8 figures in their business. And they all kind of looked at me like I had 3 heads, at that question. They weren't mean about it or anything, but they were like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, how are you all getting this done? You said that we need to do this and then do this, and then I need to shift up my business to do this, and you're talking about da-da-da. How do you find time to do that? And I was feeling particularly stressed out because my daughter was brand new, had a newborn baby, a few months old, she's upstairs in the hotel room with my nanny, and I'm trying to ask them, how are you getting all this done? And they were looking at me so confused, and they were like, what? We're not. We're delegating this to people on our team. Everything that we were sharing was, we were not under the impression that you thought that you were actually going to do this. When we said you need to do this, we mean this is what you need to delegate to your team in order to get this done. And so one of the other women who's an 8-figure entrepreneur kind of took me to the side because, she gets it, as us women do, particularly us moms. She was a married mom of 6 or something like that. And she's like, look, you seem really stressed out. One thing that you need to do when you go home is you need to hire an executive assistant. And I was like, I can't hire an executive assistant. I'm not making enough money to do that yet. And, I just don't feel comfortable. I had this, bad experience in 2017 where I had hired 2 full-time US-based employees. And then when I got pregnant with my son, I wasn't able to do all those one-on-one clients that essentially was the main source of my revenue. It was when my revenue took a nosedive and I had to let them go, and it was super embarrassing. And then I stopped paying myself for a time. And, I was just very like skittish to even like jump back on the train in terms of like bringing on support staff and hiring people. And she was like, I don't care. That is your homework, right? This mastermind, we met quarterly. And she was like, next time we come back, you need to have an executive assistant. And I'm like, but I feel like I can't afford her. I don't have the money to. She's like, if you hire her, you will have the money to afford her. And again, this is what I'm saying, mindset shift, right? Doing the opposite of what we do. Because at the time I was like, oh, I will take the next step in my business when I have the resources to make that investment. But there's a level that you get to where part of the reason why you don't have the resources to make that investment is because you haven't made that investment. So you actually need to figure it out in order to get the return to make it sustainable. And so I was like, oh man, I'm bringing this person on. I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue working with her a long time. So we did kind of like a trial run where I was working with her part-time, and just having her in my business part-time helped me get out of the weeds and grow my business so much that I was then able to double back and bring her on full time. So now she's been working with me full time. And so that's just one example of how, if you want your results to change, your mindset is going to have to change. And oftentimes it's doing the opposite of what you were doing right now. And that's not even to say that what you were doing right now is bad, but what you are doing right now is probably insufficient for the next level, which brings me to the second point that you need to really adopt if you want to create an overnight breakthrough or instantly get unstuck. And that's understanding that your strengths at this level are probably going to be your weaknesses at the next level. I know, it's so painful. I'm like dealing with this all the time, but it's so true. For me, one of my strengths is I've always been a fast learner. Like, I'm just a nerd. I geek out on things. I love consuming information, but I'm also very like tactile and kind of action oriented. And so anytime I learn something, I feel like I haven't truly mastered it, or at least absorbed it, into my system until I'm like doing it and trying it out. And so I will learn things and like within 24 hours, like be already, taking action on it, and within a week or a month have some level of like knowledge around this because of how quickly I move and how quickly I'm able to learn new things. And so while that had been a strength for a really long time in my business, I found that I was crossing from the multi-6 to 7-figure level. That was actually becoming a weakness because I was so good at learning things and just kind of implementing them myself. I had this default setting that anything that was new for me to do in my business, I essentially was the one who was going to take that on. I was not a delegator. Even though at the time I had some virtual assistants that were working for me, I was still working way too hard, and I was still taking way too many things on myself, in part because of that mindset. And again, that strength at that level. Another strength that I had was I was able to kind of create revenue out of thin air. If I hit a slump or something, I was able to come up with new products and programs that my audience would really like. And I have a great relationship with my community. And so I'm able to generate like fanfare, and, I have this whole magnetic marketing campaign. And so on the fly, I was always able to come up with, new things. And so for a long time, revenue wasn't a problem. After I had kind of gotten out of that situation, when I was dealing with all those one-on-one clients and I had my son, and, my revenue took a hit because I had to let all those one-on-one engagements go. But once I learned about group programs and again, coming up with things that my audience would want to buy, it wasn't really an issue because I was able to like launch something just based off of some creative idea and just kind of create new things. But again, that strength became a weakness when I really decided to step into my CEO role. And so I actually have a whole series called the CEO series where I'm really sharing a lot of the things that I'm learning and the mindset shifts that I have now that I'm endeavoring not just to be a coach, but to be a CEO of a coaching company, because I find that a lot of people don't talk about like the ins and outs and actually what makes this work. There's a lot of discussion around how to generate clients and how to make money, which is important because so many people start businesses and they're not even able to do that. But once you've mastered that and you've gotten clients in the door, you got to move beyond just like building a business, which even the word business is more focused on like the revenue standpoint, and really building a company, because the word company is really focused more on the organizational standpoint. And so for me, this like strength of like pulling rabbits out of hats and kind of like making stuff work was like breaking things at the next level, because we needed really consistent processes, consistent revenue. I was bringing on team, I was bringing on staff, they were on payroll, they needed consistency, like, hey, are we going to get paid? Like all of this had to be smoothed out. Even vendors that we were working with, like clock in, clock out, it can't be, I'm going to work with you this month, but next month is a bad month, so I'll pause you and then come back. Like we needed more consistency. And so that's why I was really excited. One of the milestones that I mentioned even at the top of this podcast and that I shared on my Instagram was hitting 6 figures in my business every single month consistently for the entire first quarter of 2023. That let me know that all the work that I was doing to build these processes and to build these backend systems were working, and it's allowing me to operate at a high level with support, but at a high level with support consistently, which I find is really allowing me to get ahead and do really cool things in my business. But that strength, again, of creating fanfare and coming up with new products and kind of pulling rabbits out of hat and being able to generate revenue was actually a weakness, because it was keeping me from focusing on building those systems necessary in order to create consistent income in my business. So this is what I'm saying. If you want to create an instant breakthrough, one, you probably need to do the opposite of what you're doing now, because what you're doing now is producing the results that you're doing now, and you've probably hit a ceiling, which is why you're looking for a breakthrough. But part of doing the opposite of what you're doing now is really understanding that what got you here is not going to get you there. And so you really want to do an audit of your strengths that got you to this level, and do the flip side, play devil's advocate and ask yourself, okay, how is this strength preventing me? If I had to guess, how is this strength preventing me from getting to the next level? And whatever that answer is, focus on, diving deep into those things in order to create that overnight breakthrough. And so the third thing that you'll want to do in order to create a seemingly overnight breakthrough, and what has really made all the difference for me, especially this year and especially even last year, again, I'm like so grateful, and I always get warm and fuzzies, when I see your comments. And when I posted that post on Instagram in my graduation outfit, about me graduating from my MBA program and doing this, retreat overseas and I got a lot of comments from people who were like, is there anything that you can't do? Or like, wow, you're unstoppable. Or how is it that you're like making this progress? Or this is crazy to watch. Like, how are you getting all of these things done? But this strategy right here is really my answer to that. And that is understanding the difference between goals and outcomes. And this is so key. Like, I could do a whole nother podcast on this on its own. I could do a whole nother like program on this on its own. But I find that people have the wrong understanding, and they set big goals prematurely. And I know that sounds weird, because I'm very much like a big goal person. I'm a dreamer. Like, I'm always talking about going big. But when I'm talking about going big, or quote unquote setting big goals, I say goals in air quotes, because what I'm really saying is set your sights on really big outcomes. But goals are things that are within your reach, that you're looking to accomplish now in order to make that outcome possible. And so I find that a lot of people get frustrated, or they don't make progress, or they kind of get at a standstill because they set a big goal when they should have been setting a smaller goal but keeping a big outcome. Meaning they're thinking about a big goal, let's say, 7 figures in your business, right? That was a big goal for me for a very long time. That was a big outcome that I wanted. I knew, even though that was an outcome that I wanted for a long time, that couldn't be my goal, because I didn't have the tools, the systems, like I didn't have the things in place in order to make achieving that goal possible. It was an outcome that I've always wanted, but it couldn't yet be a goal because I didn't have the resources for that goal to even be feasible. So what I did was I kept it as an outcome, and I kept it in front of me. Again, you can call it a dream, you can call it whatever you want, but it wasn't really the goal that I was working towards. I was actually working towards maybe what we would call milestones, right? So my first initial milestone that I knew that I needed to hit in order for the goal of hitting $1 million in my business to be possible was I knew I needed to come up with a high value offer that my audience would want. I talk about this all the time, even as a person that has a relatively large audience, even though my audience, like in the grand scheme of things, is really just like medium size. You know, there are people with like super, super big audiences, but there's this like misnomer online because people think it's like easy to sell things online, that they're going to create like $100 masterclass and they're going to sell 10,000 of them. And that's how they're going to get to $1 million a year. Like, do you understand how much work it would be to sell 10,000 of anything? I don't care if it's $1. Like, just because something is cheaper does not make it easier to sell. I'll say that again. Just because something is cheaper doesn't make it easier to sell. In fact, it's often easier to sell things that are more expensive than it is to sell things that are cheaper, right? How many of us have walked past, kiosk in the mall that have like, the little perfume spray, whatever, the kind of like knockoff perfume where they're like, oh, you can get this huge bundle of like perfume that you've never heard of for $25, get 6 bottles, whatever. And you're like, oh, don't spray that on me. Like, no, I don't want the hand lotion. Like, in the mall, they're like selling you all these random things that you've never heard of at a cheap price, but nobody is stopping. We're walking straight past them to go into the department store so we can buy the $300 like La Mer face cream, or, the $200 or $300, I don't know how much it is, Chanel No. 5 perfume, or one of my favorites, Tom Ford, right? Tom Ford is like $400 a bottle. We're walking past the cheap stuff to get to the more expensive stuff. Again, it's often easier to sell more expensive things than it is to sell cheaper things. But I say that because once I understood that, I realized that the first goal that I actually needed to have in my business was not hitting 7 figures, but was creating a product, a program, something of high value that I could sell at a higher ticket price so that I could sell less of them, and then that could become an asset in my business. That was the first goal. And so I spent all of my focus, my energy making that goal happen. And then once that goal happened, then I focused on coming up with a process that to actually sell it, like, oh, great. You create this amazing asset in your business, this amazing program. Maybe you get a handful of people to join it here and there, but how can you like truly sell it? Right. And so then I had a successful launch of this program. And so, wow, okay, I figured out, a mechanism to sell this program where people will be excited about it and then they'll want to enroll. And so then from there, the next goal was, okay, how can I streamline this and how can I do this consistently so that this can contribute consistent revenue to my business? That was the goal. And then having those 3 things in place, so having the asset, figuring out how to sell it, and then figuring out how to sell it consistently, is then what brought me to the place where I could actually go after the goal of hitting 7 figures in my business. I know that sounds like splitting hairs, but hopefully you see like it's subtle, but it's very, very significant. It's so important because oftentimes people are stuck because, again, they've set a really, really big goal prematurely, when what that really is an outcome that they want, right? There are big outcomes that I still have to this day that aren't actually my goal. There are other goals that I am trying to achieve ahead of that. I talk all the time about how I want to be tri-continental, right? I want to raise my kids in part overseas. We'll never leave like the USA permanently. Well, never say never, right? Let me knock on wood. I don't know. It's my hope that, we would always be based in the US, but I would love to spend 3 months, in Africa, 3 months in Europe, 3 months in Asia or somewhere else, or, just traveling all over the world and exposing my kids and myself to all these different lifestyles, right? That's like, I call that a dream, right? That's a big dream that I have. That's a big outcome that I have for my life. But that's not my goal right now because it's actually not possible for it to be my goal because there's still other things that I need to get in place for that dream to even be possible. And so there's other goals that I have. In fact, one of the goals I have right now is saving up for my first international property, which I think is probably going to be in Cape Town. Again, fell in love with South Africa, drove through the neighborhoods, even spoke with a realtor there just to kind of get the lay of the land and get some ideas about how much properties cost and all of that. My first goal would be to buy my first international property, right? And then once I get the property, making that property work for me, maybe renting it out on vacation rental sites or Airbnb or something like that, turning it into a cash flowing asset, which then would allow me to then buy the second property. And then from there, creating a work situation, not just for myself, but for my husband where he can travel with us. And so, there's all these like other milestones that we would need to hit in order for me being tri-continental to even be possible. So while that is an outcome that I am aiming for, it's an outcome ultimately that I want, it's a big dream of mine, it's not yet my goal. My goals are actually smaller and like closer at hand, but I focus on knocking those down, because when I knock them down, it gets me that much closer ultimately to the outcome. And so I found that has really been the secret to success. And then really combining all of these things, right? Because if you acknowledge that the strength that you have might be a weakness at this next level, and you acknowledge that because you realize that you need to do the opposite of what you're doing, that can help determine what your goal should actually be. Part of the reason that people struggle even when they set goals is because they're setting the wrong goals, because they're setting goals based on their current mindset, right? They're setting goals out of the current way that they think. In fact, I remember when I first got it started in my online business, or trying to be, a coach, and I didn't know how anyone was like making money online. I kid you not, in 2014, I thought everybody was like getting rich by hosting brunches. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I saw like other young women like talking about women's empowerment, and they were hosting brunches. And I was like, oh, maybe they are hosting brunches in big cities like Atlanta, and they're getting like thousands of people to attend, and they're doing them every month. And maybe that's how they're making enough to quit their jobs. Like, I didn't even know about courses, virtual program. Like, I didn't know anything. I was just like, okay, maybe I need to figure out how to consistently, successfully sell these like women's empowerment brunches, and then I'll make a bunch of money and I'll be able to quit my job. Now, thankfully, I learned later that was actually not going to be the best pathway in order to quit my job, but I didn't know at the time. And so while that was my initial goal, once I completed that first goal where I had my first event, I quickly started pivoting and realizing that I needed to do something differently. So I say this to say you might be frustrated or being stuck because you are setting goals out of your current mindset or your current perspective, when you actually need to change the way you think. And one of the easiest ways to change the way you think is to simply get up on someone or get under a type of people who have what it is that you want, and network with them, get in their circles. That's why I spent all that money to get into that mastermind, because you will see their mindset and then you will change your goals, right? Even when I was in the mastermind and they were saying all these different things that I needed to do, my goal was to do it all myself, until I spoke with someone who was already an 8-figure entrepreneur, and she was like, that's not your goal. Your new goal is to find an executive assistant. And thankfully I listened to her and I did that, and it ended up being a domino effect that opened up all these other doors for me. So this is what I'm saying. This is how you literally can create a breakthrough overnight. Like, if you are listening to this, seriously, think about all the different things that you are stuck on in your life. Go ahead and write them down, and then ask yourself, what is it that I'm doing that's not working? And what's the opposite thing that I could be doing? And am I willing to try that out? Ask yourself, what are the strengths that I have been using that has gotten me to this level? And how can those things possibly be a weakness that are preventing me from breaking through the ceiling that I am really struggling with? And then ask yourself, the goal that I am working towards, is it actually appropriate for me to work towards that as a goal? Or should I just keep that as a dream and an outcome? And maybe there's like a more immediate goal that I need to be knocking down in order to make that dream or goal possible. I promise you, this is my process. If you do this, you will have an instant breakthrough, an overnight breakthrough, and you'll be that much closer to your dreams, and you will instantly get unstuck. So I hope you really enjoyed this podcast. If you did, make sure that you tune in to my next episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.